Halloween night horror, the candy man who poisoned his own son. Razor blades in apples, pins in chocolate bars, and poisoned candy from strangers are some of the common anxieties that are spoken about during Halloween. These fears are heard throughout neighborhoods. Every single candy, every single wrapper, and every single precious piece of innocence that is handed out by ecstatic neighbors is scrutinized by the parents. Fear, which has been fed by decades of hearsay, gave birth to this ceremony. A story that was so horrifying that it shattered the trust of a community and stained Halloween for all time is the source of this urban legend, which in contrast to the majority of urban legends, has its origins in something that is chillingly genuine. The evening of October 31st, 1974, it started in the small town of Deer Park, which is located in the state of Texas. An evening of trick-or-treating was enjoyed by the O'Brien family, which consisted of Ronald, his wife Daneen, and their two children, Timothy, who was 8 years old, and Elizabeth, who was 5 years old. Under the illumination of the streetlights, the youngsters sprinted from one house to the next, their costumes flapping in the fall breeze and their buckets brimming with candy. It was the ideal Halloween night, full of merriment and excitement brought on by the presence of sugar. However, despite the fact that the youngsters appeared to be experiencing perfect joy, Ronald O'Brien's carefully crafted smile was concealing something much more sinister. It was a man who was drowning in debt that was hiding behind his kind and church-going character. In addition to being overdue on his auto payments and having his house on the verge of foreclosure, he had recently been fired from his work at an optometrist practice for what was believed to be larceny committed. According to his neighbors, he was a father who was having a hard time making ends meet. In reality, he was a man who was planning an act that was beyond comprehension. Numerous life insurance policies with a combined value of approximately $60,000 had been purchased by O'Brien for both of his children. This amount would be equivalent to several $100,000 in today's currency. From the perspective of another person, this would have appeared to be a wise safety net. For Ronald, however, it was the template for committing murder. On the evening of Halloween, while O'Brien was out with his children and friends, he created a number of long, colorful pixie sticks candies. According to the allegations, these candies originated from one of the residences that they had visited. They were overjoyed, the children. However, concealed within at least one of those straws was a lethal secret: potassium cyanide, which is one of the poisons that has the quickest mechanism of action known to man. Following his return to the house, Ronald gave his children permission to consume one piece of candy before going to bed. Timothy, who was still dressed up, decided to go with the pixie sticks. In response to his complaint that it had a bitter taste, which is a telltale symptom of cyanide, his father offered him a drink to help him overcome his discomfort. It was only a matter of moments before the young kid started to violently convulse, throw up, and scream out in anguish. While his son was collapsing, his father impersonated a state of fear and yelled for assistance. It was already too late for Timothy to make it to the hospital by the time he arrived. The sweets had accomplished what it set out to do. In Deer Park, the news of Timothy's passing spread like wildfire throughout the community. The entire state of Texas, and soon the entire nation, was engulfed in panic. Parents were cautioned by television anchors to dispose of the candy that their children had eaten, and law enforcement personnel searched the neighborhood for additional contaminated candies. It was the horror that everyone had always whispered about coming true. Candy that had been poisoned and taken from the home of a stranger. However, the detectives quickly became aware of something quite peculiar. Nobody else among the children had become ill. There was not a single other candy in the vicinity that had been poisoned. In addition, O'Brien's account of which residents had provided him with the pixie sticks did not make any sense. In response to the investigators' persistent questions, he repeatedly altered his account. It was then that suspicion went inward, and the mask of the loving father started to fall apart. As the investigation progressed, the investigators discovered that Ronald O'Brien had recently inquired about purchasing cyanide at a chemical supply business during their investigation. In addition to that, he had been sharing with his friends and co-workers the most straightforward methods for killing someone without being discovered. As soon as they found out about the life insurance policies, the reason became glaringly obvious. He had slaughtered his own son in cold blood for financial gain. and he intended to kill his daughter as well in order to increase the amount of money he received. It is quite possible that the other children who were given extra pixie sticks that evening were intended to divert suspicion. However, the scheme failed before any of the snacks were devoured by any of the youngsters. In 1975, O'Brien was taken into custody and charged with murder with the death penalty. All of the nation was enthralled by his trial. By portraying him as a cunning killer, the prosecution portrayed him as a man who transformed one of the most precious moments of childhood into a weapon. There was an attempt made by the defense to establish that the candy must have been poisoned by an unknown person. Nonetheless, the evidence proved overwhelming. It took the jury less than an hour to reach a verdict of guilty. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. O'Brien adhered to his innocence and asserted that he was framed for the crime while he was waiting to be executed. In spite of this, he refused to acknowledge his guilt right up until the very end, when he was being strapped to the gurney on March 31st, 1984. As the lethal injection was administered, a throng gathered outside the Texas prison, some of whom were dressed up in Halloween costumes and others were chanting "Trick or Treat" as the injection terminated his life. I found the irony to be eerie. It was around this time that the man who had become known as the Candy Man met his end, while the entire world laughed at the very horror that he had produced. After he passed away, the legend of Halloween sweets that were poisoned became a part of the folklore of the United States. Concerns such as "check your candy," "don't eat anything unwrapped," and "beware of strangers" are brought up again and again during the month of October. However, what very few people are aware of is the fact that there has never been a confirmed instance of a stranger poisoning candy that was handed out as part of a trick or treat. The sole instance of a youngster being poisoned by Halloween sweets was caused by his own father, and it occurred within the confines of his own home. The tragic death of Ronald O'Brien is not only the loss of a youngster who was not guilty of any wrongdoing, it is also the loss of confidence. This serves as a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not discovered hiding in the shadows, but rather are found sitting at the dinner table, smiling, making plans, and trying to be something else. As a result of his criminal act, the innocence that was associated with Halloween was replaced with a somber anxiety that continues to remain even after 50 years have passed. Take a moment to remember Timothy O'Brien this Halloween when you see your children dressed up in costumes with their faces painted and their bags stuffed with candy. The reason that every parent examines every wrapper, the reason that every community speaks about safety, and the reason that Halloween is laced with terror is because of his story. Due to the fact that the true terror that occurred on Halloween night did not originate from a ghost, a ghoul, or a creature that was hiding in the corner of the room. In addition to a single piece of candy that was poisoned, it was a father's greed that caused Halloween to be remembered for all time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.